This critique focuses on an analytical submission dissecting Ben Shapiro's recent breakdown of JD Vance's shifting political philosophies, his economic populism, and his controversial foreign policy stances during a recent Joe Rogan appearance.
Our first major point of critique is that the structural choices regarding the core economic arguments really need a much sharper, much more deliberate focus.
Right, jumping right in.
Yeah, well, the main weakness here is that Vance's pivot toward economic populism misses a massive opportunity to deeply analyze the underlying tension between his Catholic integralist justifications and traditional conservative free market principles.
I noticed that too. I mean, the text outlines his reliance on Pope Leo XIII's 1891 encyclical, Rerum Novarum.
Right, and it brings up his deep disdain for the American meritocracy, which is great. They read like fun facts rather than the fundamental structural departures they actually are. I mean, early in the text, the submission establishes James Madison's Federalist 51 and the Declaration of Independence as the baseline for conservative thought.
Right, that's the established ruler.
Yeah, but then the narrative fails to critically bridge how Vance's specific argument, like, say, his claim that the meritocracy is a spiritual failure, are actively attempting to dismantle and rewrite that exact baseline.
So, a key theme running through this material seems to be the author highlighting Vance's use of Rerum Novarum as a blueprint for American economic policy.
Yes.
But because that connection isn't explicitly brought into conflict with the Madisonian baseline, it feels a bit like watching someone try to repair a modern fuel-injected engine using a medieval theological manual.
Oh, that's a fantastic way to put it.
I mean, the text shows us the manual and it shows us the engine, but it never explicitly states how fundamentally mismatched the tool is for the system it is trying to alter.
Right, the reader is just left to guess at the mechanical failure on there.
So how do we fix that? What's the suggestion here?
The suggestion is to strengthen the contrast by directly pitting Vance's specific economic complaints against the traditional conservative benchmarks provided earlier in the text.
Just force them to interact?
Exactly. You need to show the exact point of ideological friction. Instead of letting these two frameworks just kind of float in separate sections of the document, shove them into the same room.
Right. So we need some concrete examples of what that collision looks like on the page.
Well, let's look at the section where he talks about Vance's admiration for Japan's strawberry industry and the pristine condition of their public subways over raw GDP.
Yeah, which currently just reads as a quirky tangent about aesthetics.
Right. The author needs to take this specific anecdote and explicitly contrast it with Madison's view on human nature and limited government.
Because Madisonian conservatism operates on the premise of a flawed human nature, right?
Yes, prioritizing systems that limit state overreach. But Vance is arguing for a state-directed system that curates specific moral and aesthetic outcomes, like perfect fruit and clean transit, at the direct expense of free market efficiency.
Right. You can't just list Vance's preferences.
No, you have to measure them against the ruler you established on page 1. Another concrete example is when the text brings up Vance's praise for Teamsters head Sean O'Brien and his alignment with Bernie Sanders-style policies.
Oh yeah, that shouldn't just be categorized as populist.
Exactly. The author must juxtapose that directly against the traditional conservative belief in private property and unalienable rights.
It brings a much sharper edge to the critique of his spiritual complaints as well, doesn't it?
Definitely. The author needs to emphasize the point that expecting the government or a meritocracy to provide spiritual fulfillment is a massive category error.
It's like criticizing a hammer for not being a screwdriver.
Right. The meritocracy is an allocation system designed to distribute resources based on skill and output. It is entirely devoid of theology by design.
So criticizing it for lacking spiritual nourishment is an analytical dead end.
Which is why the author needs to step in here and explicitly argue that Vance is demanding a secular economic engine perform the duties of a church.
That changes the entire reading experience from a summary to a real philosophical audit.
Exactly. But let's move on to the second major error, which is angle and originality regarding foreign policy.
Okay, yeah, let's get into it.
The analysis of Vance's foreign policy successfully exposes his defense of the Iran Memorandum of Understanding, yet it accepts his conspiratorial rhetoric at face value rather than dissecting it as a deliberate political mechanism.
Right, the weakness here is that the piece meticulously details his various assertions.
Yeah, like his claim that critics of the MOU have no alternatives, his pushes regarding Epstein and Mossad connections, and his citation of a Time magazine article about paid Israeli opposition.
But the narrative just categorizes these statements as silly talk or simply sloppy.
It misses the strategic angle entirely. It completely ignores how conspiracism functions as a shield against legitimate policy criticism.
Let's look closely at the section discussing the foreign policy exchanges on the Rogan interview. By just debunking these claims, the author is inadvertently letting the subject dictate the terms of the analysis.
That's fascinating. What are the potential limitations or counterarguments to that idea? Is there a risk that focusing solely on the factual inaccuracy of the Epstein and Mossad claims might overlook the utility of these claims for Vance's specific media strategy?
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you spend 3 paragraphs proving that the Mossad didn't do something, you spent 3 paragraphs not talking about the actual policy failures. You've fallen for the diversion.
Which leads perfectly into the suggestion. The author needs to pivot the angle from simply chronicling Vance's conspiracy theories to evaluating them as a calculated rhetorical tool.
A tool used specifically to distract from his own diplomatic missteps.
Exactly. And to pander to a highly specific, hyper-online demographic.
So, what are some concrete examples for the author to implement this pivot?
Well, the author should reframe the discussion of that Time magazine article. You know, the one planted by a senior U.S. official that vaguely targets Brad Parscale.
Right. Right now, just reads like a factual dispute over political funding.
Exactly. Instead, frame it as a textbook case of Vance utilizing the strategy of claiming everyone who doesn't like him is AIPAC or foreign funding.
So it's not an error in fact-checking. It's a deliberate shield to render criticism illegitimate.
Yeah. Another concrete example is when addressing his claims about 94 million Iranians flooding the globe if the regime falls, or his failure to criticize Tucker Carlson while attacking everyone else.
The author needs to frame those as deliberate diversions, not just inconsistencies.
Exactly. Highlight how these conspiracies distract from concrete diplomatic failures. And the best example of this in the text, which is currently just buried, is Vance praising Pakistan just 5 minutes before the Pakistani Prime Minister attended the Ayatollah's funeral.
Oh, wow, that is a staggering juxtaposition.
It really is. It's a tangible diplomatic embarrassment.
So the author should reposition that Pakistan detail to be the anchor of the paragraph.
Right. Show the concrete diplomatic failure first, then introduce the Epstein and Mossad conspiracies immediately afterward as the informational chaff deployed to confuse the radar.
That reordering completely shifts the power dynamic of the essay. It prioritizes the why over the what.
Exactly. Now, for the final major critique, we need to talk about significance and relevance, the big so what of the piece.
The polling data.
Yes, the inclusion of the Echelon's Insights polling data provides a brilliant quantitative anchor, but the text fails to fully synthesize how Vance's ideological shapeshifting actively alienates the very coalition needed to assemble a winning electorate.
Right. The weakness is that the breakdown of a political tribes is presented near the end, almost as an appendix.
Yeah. The submission notes his horseshoe democratic approach, socially to the right, economically to the left, places him squarely in the new Republican populist tribe.
Which makes up only 6% of the electorate, right?
Exact. But it doesn't weave this devastating statistic back through the earlier examples of his behavior.
So the ultimate so what of the piece is mathematically isolated from the behavioral analysis.
Precisely. Which brings us to the suggestion. The author needs to integrate the polling data throughout the piece as a recurring lens to evaluate each of Vance's ideological conversions.
Demonstrating step-by-step how his rhetoric systematically shrinks his viable electorate.
Right. We need concrete examples of how to weave that math in.
Okay, so when citing George Will's critique of Vance as being unstable as water for converting from atheism to Catholicism and from anti-Trump to pro-Trump,
the author should tie this directly to his inability to capture the 11% American institutionalists or the middle American optimists who value stability and meritocracy.
Show the reader exactly who is walking out the door when he shifts his persona.
Exactly. And another concrete example is when detailing his anti-corporate, pro-union stance. Show exactly how praising Sean O'Brien pushes away the 18% loyal right and the 13% moderate right.
You create this compounding effect where the reader watches the coalition mathematically disintegrate.
Yeah. And the author can use the polling to prove that attempting to capture the crossover vote of Joe Rogan listeners who praise left-wing figures like James Tallarico is an electoral dead end that grants the premise of the political left.
The material makes a strong case for the sheer folly of this approach by highlighting the political malpractice of the 6% strategy. But, I think there's a deeper layer to explore here.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, if Vance's strategy is this mathematically doomed for a general election, could the text explore the possibility that he isn't misreading the room at all, but rather reading a completely different room? Specifically, the insular online ecosystem of 2028 primary voters.
Oh, that is a really sharp pushback. The text currently operates on the unstated assumption that he is attempting, and failing, to build a general election coalition.
Right. So explicitly addressing the alternative as a necessary layer of dimensionality.
It really does. It shows that focusing entirely on this 6% new Republican populist tribe might be a highly calculated survival tactic for a fractured primary.
And when you restructure the essay to accommodate that recurring data, the 6% statistic isn't just an appendix anymore.
No, it becomes the central spine of the narrative. Every time he takes a stance, the reader feels the electoral math tighten.
Well, this has been an incredibly productive breakdown. To wrap up this critique, the most critical steps to elevate this material are first, to boldly connect Vance's economic theories to his departure from foundational conservative principles.
Right, get that ideological friction out into the open.
Second, to reframe his foreign policy conspiracism as a deliberate shield for policy failures rather than mere sloppiness.
Stop letting the subject dictate the terms of the analysis.
Exactly. And finally, to use the 6% polling data as the central spine of the argument to prove the electoral failure of his horseshoe strategy.
By implementing these structural and thematic shifts, the piece will transform from a summary of immediate conflict into a sharp, undeniable political autopsy.
We highly encourage the author to apply these structural adjustments and submit the revised work back to us for another critique.